Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast. We record on Monday, March 7th, as we recap the recent men's basketball games against Louisville and Clemson, as well as the women's stint in the ACC Tournament. We'll also touch on the football assistant coaches' interviews and give the softball team their props after sweeping Clemson this past weekend. All of that and much more coming up on episode 228 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, which starts right now. We welcome you in whether you are listening on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, or watching live or archived on the YouTube. We ask you to like, comment, and subscribe if you are on YouTube. And if you're watching live, make sure to drop a comment or question in the chat for David and Chris, and we'll get to them with Nick at the end of the show. As always, the Tech Sideline Podcast is brought to you by the Southeast Regional Training Center. You can help bring Olympic hopeful athletes to Blacksburg in one of the best and fastest growing programs in the country. Go to southeastrtc.com to learn more and donate today. Got a fairly different setup today. Once we have everything working, sorry for the technical difficulties for those of you who were on the YouTube stream. Jake Lyman, our wonderful host, is traveling up to Brooklyn for the ACC Tournament, so we miss him. You're stuck with me today, unfortunately. David Cunningham, managing editor of TechSideline.com, is across the way. To my right is lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Behind the scenes is Will Stewart filling in for Malcolm Stewart. He truly does it all, folks. We'll see if he can rival the best podcast producer in the land after the little mishap at the beginning.
It's not looking good so far.
And in the fourth chair is Nick Brown. He will have his segment in the middle of the show and get to your YouTube questions at the end. And I'm your podcast host for today, Katie Adams. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start it off with men's basketball. We have two games to go over here, one positive and one negative. So we'll start with the positive. The Hokies won 75-43 against Louisville at home. Feels like 1991, doesn't it, Chris?
That's like 1 point for every year Tech has gone without beating Louisville.
Literally,
yeah.
32-point win, 31 years. I mean,
it was great. Will and I had great seats. We were down on the courtside seats, and we sat right at the end of Tech's bench. And so, you could actually – I was paying attention, trying to listen to what Mike Young was saying in the huddle during
it gets very loud.
Yeah, it does get loud down there. He has to be because the crowd is so loud and everything. But loved that game. It was like 3 decades of frustration all being let out at once. And it really helped Tech in the computer standings. They jumped up, I think, 4 or 5 spots in the net after that game, about 6 spots in Ken Palm, a few spots in the BPI. So anytime you get a huge win like that, it helps your efficiency rankings and makes you look better in those computer metrics. I think that game went about as well as you could expect.
Yeah, Tech only had 8 turnovers in that game. I just had to look at the stats because it's been 6 days since that game. It feels like it's been forever. Tech played very, very well. Efficient basketball. 8 turnovers, and 2 of them were shot clock violations, so that's team turnovers. So really only 6 bad giveaways. Tech shot the ball pretty well. 3-point shots were going in, and it looked like the Tech team that we've come to know so far this season. Just really good performance all over the floor. I don't think there was one big reason why Tech won. It was just efficient basketball.
The big reason Tech won. One of the reasons Tech won is how horrible Louisville is. They are truly terrible. When I saw them take the court, I'm like, oh man, we might be in trouble. These guys look the part. And then they actually started playing basketball, and they're not very good at it. It's crazy how a program like Louisville, they've won a national championship fairly recently, how they drop to that level. I don't know what's going on inside their program or anything, but there's no ball movement on offense. They just didn't seem to care much defensively. It doesn't hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
but we need teams like the league needs teams like Louisville to be good. Like before the season starts, you expect Louisville to be quad 1 or quad 2 win at home. Instead, they're quad 3, so it doesn't do anything for the resume. And you can go up and down the ACC. Like Tech hasn't played a quad 1 team at home all year. Yeah. And who would have ever thought that?
When you have Virginia, North Carolina, Syracuse, and Louisville at home.
you would think at least one of those would be quad one, if not two, but it just didn't happen this year.
Yeah, I think the thing that impressed me most about that game, the Louisville game, was that Tech played all 13 guys, walk-ons got in, and 7 guys scored 7 points or more.
Right.
So very evenly distributed, and I think there were 11 of 13 guys that played scored at least a bucket. So, Tech spread the ball around really, really well. And like you said, it was one for the metrics. Metrics got up. I think that is, as we'll talk about in a second, Tech obviously lost this Saturday at Clemson, but that Louisville game, obviously they're going to play better teams, but that Louisville game, the way they played is something they need to replicate going forward.
You talk about how bad Louisville is. They had 18 turnovers and only 17 field goals, so Tech definitely got some help there. But this win was significant in a lot of ways. I think one of the biggest takeaways from it was that Tech accomplished a feat that no other ACC team had done in the past, finishing above 500 after starting league play 2-7. Both of you kind of talk about the resiliency this team has to get over a hump like that.
Yeah, Syracuse did it. Syracuse started 0-4, and that was what Tech also started. 0-4 and got to 9-9, but no team had ever started 2-7 and finished above 500. And honestly, with an 18-game schedule, that's really tough because you essentially you can only lose one time in the last 9 games. But I mean, they just ripped off 9 of the last 11 wins. That's obviously you have to fault Tech. You can't just give credit here and not give blame there. Tech obviously got off to a really bad start. I mean, you can't start 2-7 and then have to climb out of the hole. But the way they've done it, the way that they've kind of just put their head down and gone to work, and half those games have been on the road too. You're winning at Florida State. They did lose at North Carolina, but they beat Miami and they beat Georgia Tech on the road. And the combination of road games, and even when they weren't shooting well, they're still finding ways to win games. I think this team has been really good as of late. Obviously, tough loss at Clemson, but if this team can keep momentum from the past month and a half going, I think it'll be in a good place.
Defense has been so much better, and that's been the big difference. I mean, they've jumped up about 50 spots in overall defensive efficiency, and I don't think that's something you see very often, where you get to the month of February and you see that big of a jump in the efficiency rating. So, I remember that year Buzz Williams changed his defensive scheme basically in the middle of the season, and Tech got a lot better defensively and made the NCAA tournament as a result. And Mike Young didn't change his defensive scheme; they just started playing better. I think the backups improved, like Darius Maddox, Sean Padula, and Gasson, to probably a lesser extent. They all improved defensively, and thus they were able to play more. And Tech got better as a team as a result. It's impressive resiliency. I mean, I think everybody had given up on a possibility of an NCAA tournament. Tech was 10-10 going to Florida State, a place they haven't won since
the 90s. No, I think 1990.
1990. I mean, I was expecting to be 10-11.
And now fans are upset that Tech lost on Saturday, which arguably so, but like the fact that they were sitting at 10-10 and now they're 19 and 12. Yeah. I mean, that is extremely impressive.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a law of averages guy. Yeah. And I think I would have liked to have beaten Clemson. I'm disappointed that they didn't, but at the same time, if they had won that game, they would have won 10 out of their final 11. You don't see teams winning 10 out of 11 conference games.
Ever.
Like, Duke is the best team in the league this year, and they didn't do it. So it's honestly, winning 9 out of 11 is improbable.
Yeah.
Very, very improbable. So if Virginia Tech doesn't make the NCAA tournament, it's not going to be because they lost to Clemson.
It's going to be the earlier game.
Exactly. Yeah. It's going to be because they lost to Xavier's backups. It's going to be because they lost to Boston College. Yeah. It's not going to be because
they lost at home to NC State.
Yeah, and the thing is, man, that's the other thing, and you don't want to blame this too much, but like that COVID shutdown for a week and a half, I mean, that pretty much cost them the NC State game. They had like 5 players couldn't return to practice until the day before the NC State game. I mean, when I see a player bicycling through my neighborhood to try to stay in shape, that tells me they're not even allowed in the facility. So your program shuts down and everybody else's doesn't, and you can't even practice. And I think they would have won the NC State game.
Yeah, and then right now that's a blemish on
exactly.
The resume.
Exactly. I would like for the committee to take that under consideration. They probably won't, because you have to do that for everybody. You have to do your research. Like, I don't know how many other teams.
I don't know how many teams. I think it's been a lot less common teams going on COVID
certainly
pauses.
This year than last year. But yeah, I think because I think we all thought Tech was starting to play better at that point.
Yeah,
they hammered St. Bonaventure, and then they played well at Duke. I mean, they led 70% of that game, basically, and then COVID shutdown happened.
Yeah, I think the one good thing in this last 11-game stretch, like you said, the bench. The bench has been fantastic, and I think Mike Young's trusting him a little bit more. Darius Maddox has been fantastic. Sean Padula too. At Miami, those two I think scored the last 4 or 5 baskets for Tech, and that's all bench points, and that just speaks to the growth of the guys off the bench. And you mentioned the defensive aspect. I think one of the reasons why a lot of those guys didn't play earlier in the year was because Mike Young was afraid of putting them out on the floor and then getting absolutely torched on the defensive end. And improving, Padula and Maddox and Gasson, improving their specific defensive skill set so they can go out and be thrown into these situations, and Gasson can go block shots and Padula can get a steal. Padula got a huge steal at Miami.
He did.
Like stuff like that, that's not stuff you saw earlier in the year. And if Tech is going to make a run here, the bench is going to have to be really big.
Well, everything really seemed to click for Tech in this game against Louisville. Justyn Mutts was close to his second triple-double, just 4 assists away. Also had another monster play when Storm Murphy teed him up for that alley-oop slam. Gosh. You got to think, how many more of these Sports Center top 10-esque plays does this guy have in him?
Exactly. Well, hopefully a few more. Hopefully a few more, because Tech probably needs 2 to make the NCAA tournament. That dunk happened on the opposite end of the court of where Will and I were sitting. We were hoping it would happen. Yeah. Something like that would happen right in front of us. But the Gasson follow-up
was right in front.
Was right in front of us. And it was actually more impressive right there in front of us than it was on television. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked Mutts about the dunk after the game, and he was like, man, I didn't think I was going to catch it. He's like, I literally just tried to grab it and throw it in the...
Well, how about that one he had against Clemson, the and one, the dunk and one? That was
really impressive. But then he gave a shout out to David Gasson for his... He's like, but that putback dunk, he's just like, wow, that was incredible. That was... I don't know, did Mutts... I don't think Mutts' dunk made SportsCenter top 10, but I know Gasson... I know Gasson's putback dunk
really?
did.
Man, there must have been a lot of good plays there.
Yeah,
the Mutts
but just... Mutts's, he and Storm had that one play earlier in the season. I think he's against like Radford.
Yeah.
Yes.
Between the legs, one hand. There's
the nutmeg.
Yeah.
Which we're normally used to seeing in soccer. You don't see it in basketball very often.
So Mutts played well. Aluma had a really good game too. Good performances from that senior duo. You'd think it was their last game in Castle, but David, you were there in the post game when neither of them would confirm if it was their last game in Castle Coliseum. How huge would it be to obtain one or both of them for next year?
Yeah, from what I've heard, I've talked to some people, and from what I heard, I don't think Justin's coming back. I mean, you got to think this is a guy who. Both of these guys are 23 right now. They'd be 24 at the end of basketball season next year. That's a long time to be in college. Justyn is on his third degree.
Yeah, 1 undergraduate degree and 2 graduate degrees.
Yeah, he's working on his second master's. So, it might make a little bit more sense, I think, for Keve. And from what I heard, there's maybe like a 15-20% chance that Keve would stay. And you got to think this is somebody who's trying to boost his draft stock. But from everything I've heard, I can't blame him for not wanting to come back to school.
If Keve wants a chance to play in the NBA, he has to take his chance now, because playing in college one more year isn't going to help him.
Yeah.
The NBA is not going to – the older you get, the less likely you are to get drafted in the NBA. And at this point, he wouldn't get drafted anyway. He'd have to make it by other means.
Yeah. But
go the Justin Robinson route.
Yeah. But I do think them obviously coming back, that's a shot in the arm in terms of front court depth. Right now – your front court depth for next year is David Gasson, John Ogiaco, Lynn Kidd, if you want to count him, Patrick Wessler coming in. Those are the only guys you have in the front court. If you keep one of them, that's a big shot in the arm. If it's Keve Aluma, who earned second-team All-ACC honors this morning, that would be big. I just don't know if it's going to happen.
I suspect somebody's coming in via the transfer portal to fill at least one of those front court voids. I think a guy like Keve, whether he plays in the G League next year or he plays in Europe or whatever, he's going to be making decent money. And he has a chance to – I don't think he's an NBA player, but he has a chance to make a good amount of money in a professional overseas career. And he probably needs to get on with that because every year you play in college, that's one less year you're earning six figures maybe overseas, So I think it'd be the right decision for him to go ahead and go. Mutts, though, if there are any big donors out there listening with businesses and you want Virginia Tech to be a successful basketball program, get Mutts signed up to an NIL deal because it's a possibility that he could make more money through an NIL deal coming back to Virginia Tech next year than he could make playing professional basketball somewhere.
Yeah, and
that might appeal to him.
And I don't even know if playing professional basketball is a route that Justyn Mutts wants to pursue.
Right. But no, I will say that Mutts really likes it at Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell. I mean, he's the only player I've ever heard start the "Let's Go Hokies" chant during game. Yeah. Now, what if you got that guy a good NIL deal and said you get paid to come back and play basketball for Virginia Tech for one more year? I don't know what would happen if somebody put that idea in his head. Yeah. So if you're interested in Virginia Tech being going to the NCAA tournament again next year and bringing back one of their best players, and you run a business and you want to help the program, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, well, and this is a guy who recorded the second ever triple-double in Tech history, and like Katie said, almost had another one against Louisville, 4 assists away, and he really dynamic, loves Virginia Tech. You got to think, I'm sure, if he's probably sitting there thinking, why would I want to come back for another year? I've already been in school long enough. But if you entice him, if some donors give him, a deal.
If he gets paid, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if a donor says, hey, I'll give you NIL sponsorship, I mean, that's huge for student athlete. I don't believe any men's basketball players at Tech have one yet.
Nothing major.
Yeah,
so I think basically, and it not only helps it would help next year's team, obviously, but it's also a recruiting thing. It's like, okay, Mike Young, you're not allowed to recruit players with NIL money and say, you're going to get this, you're going to get that. But they can be told, like, okay, Justyn Mutts was a really good player for us, and as a senior, he got paid this much NIL money. So if you come in and you're a good player, you have the opportunity. You could potentially earn that. And so you not only help in the short term, you potentially help the program in the long term too. Yeah. And this is the type of stuff that Tech donors, big donors that own businesses, need to start getting behind because fans of other schools are doing it for sure.
Moving on from the Louisville game, we've seen a lot of great basketball in the month of March so far, but so far the month of March has not been good to Virginia Tech. After winning 9 of 10 in their last games, they dropped 1 to Clemson in what was supposed to be a must-win game. What was the problem for the Hokies in this one?
I think Clemson, and you watched it at a bar, correct?
I was at PK's.
Yeah, Clemson, to me, was just the more physical team. Mm-hmm. The aggressor. I think that was the most physical basketball team Virginia Tech's played all year. There have been some other physical teams. NC State, who, and we can talk about this in a sec, Tech is going to play Clemson or NC State again in the tournament in Brooklyn on Wednesday. But both of those teams were very, very physical with Tech. Tech turned the ball over 5 times in the last couple minutes at NC State in Raleigh and still won that game. But this Clemson team just frustrated Tech. And I think one thing that stands out to me is the second half scoring was pretty much all Justyn Mutts. He had 11 points. Sean Padula added 5 or 6. Keve Aluma attempted 2 shots in the second half. They really shut him down, and Tech had I believe, the most 3-pointers it's attempted all season. Mm-hmm. And so what Clemson basically did was basically said, we're going to shut down Keve Aluma, your second-team All-ACC performer, and we're going to make you score the ball other ways. Mm-hmm. Justyn Mutts did it, but Tech fired up so many 3-pointers and just missed. Naheem Aline had those 2 in the last minute on same spot on the right wing, missed both. And good game plan by Clemson. Sure. And this is, if that is a way that teams are going to go, okay, well, we saw Clemson do it. Now we're going to try to replicate that, try to do the same thing. And
well, I expect we're going to see the same thing on Wednesday. I'd be surprised if NC State
wins. Yeah, but even if it is NC State kind of did the same thing. They beat Clemson. They beat Tech here.
They've got athletes. NC State does have athletes.
Yeah,
They're not very good at basketball, apparently, but they do have good athletes.
They won 4 games in the ACC this year, but one of them was against Virginia Tech at home in Blacksburg. Right. So, yeah, I think Clemson was just the aggressor, and in a situation on the road where it's a must-win, one of the things, and I'm not going to criticize Mike Young for this, but I'd be interested to see for Wednesday's game, if it is Clemson, how he adjusts, because I think Tech got a little out physical, and when you can't get the ball inside to Keve Aluma and your shots aren't falling from the outside, you have to find a way to win. And I think that's what March comes down to, finding a way to win. Yeah,
I think the biggest thing for me was you just didn't say Keve Aluma's name very much in the second half. His positioning, like he rarely ever caught the ball in a position to score in the second half. And I know the Tech offense doesn't function very well. It can function as well when your best player doesn't catch the ball in a position to score. I mean, Keve Aluma being dangerous in the paint opens everything up for the offense. He and Mutts are such good passers out of the post. So I think it's beneficial when Aluma is scoring, because if he's scoring, then he's opening up. It opens up everything for everybody else. But so I think the challenge. I don't think it's really an X's and O's thing. I just think the challenge is go play more physical basketball on Wednesday than you did on Saturday. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Yeah, I maybe a little mentality thing. Right, I think. And to the shooting, we obviously saw we just talked about this. Tech shot very well at against Louisville here. Mm-hmm. They made 7 threes in the first half and had about the same looks in the second. Made 2 of 13. Yeah. So that's when it's just kind of a combination of everything. When your shots aren't falling and when you can't get the ball to your best player, it makes it difficult. Yeah. So when you can't get the ball to your best player, and Couture and Padula both have bad games shooting from the outside, and Aline was the one guy who showed consistency shooting the 3-ball in that game. But I think Couture made a couple, but he attempted a lot. Couture was 1 for 5. Aline was 5 for 10. Aline played very well. Yeah, exactly. But the rest of the team, Storm Murphy was 0 for 2. Mm-hmm. Sean Padula was 0 for 3. Right. And Tech started off, you got to remember, first 6-8 minutes, Tech start off really poorly shooting. Yeah, well, we didn't get to watch the first half. Yeah, because of overtime in Georgia Tech Boston College. In that very important Boston College game. So I think it was the 8:30 mark before the game finally came on TV at PK. So, but Will and I were keeping up with it on the phone, and it was seemed like it was 5-0 Clemson forever. Yeah. And Tech took control. It was up 33-24. So at that point, you're like, okay, tough start, but we got control of it now. But it didn't turn out that way. Clemson had a 6-0 run at the end of the first half to make it 33-30, and then started the half on a 4-0 run. Yeah. So it was a 10-0 run over about, I think, a 150-second span to end the half and start the second half. And but it's a learning experience. I know Mike Young wasn't happy after the game. Very, very blunt. Very just. He didn't want to talk, and I can't blame him. I mean, it's hard when your team just gets not necessarily outplayed, but just out physicaled, and you're the better team. Yeah, it's one thing if you go out there and miss shots like against North Carolina, but it's generally speaking, you outplay the other team. You just don't make your shots. But Tech didn't outplay Clemson, and they could have outplayed Clemson. Yeah. That's the frustrating part.
It was also Virginia Tech kind of relapsed on what their problem was towards the beginning of the season, where they struggled in the last 5 minutes of the game, which they did again. And so this is a bad time of the year to be having that problem come up again. And you look to Justyn Mutts, of course, and he can't do it all himself.
Yeah, I mean, he had 11 second-half points. And I just touched on this. I know they're doubling Keve Aluma. They're helping Keve Aluma, so he's not getting the ball in good positions. But this is a veteran team. I mean, we've talked about it so many times. This is a team that starts 3 fifth-year seniors and 2 juniors. They've been in the battles before. And it was kind of strange to me that Tech just couldn't figure out a way to adjust, a way to get those open looks. I think Tech missed 6 or 7 3-pointers in the last 5 minutes of the game. So clearly Clemson was, I don't want to say letting them shoot, but if those threes start to fall, Clemson's going to play you a little bit differently. Sure. And it's one of those things where it's if you prove to Clemson that you're not going to hit that shot. So why am I going to defend you?
You can accuse Brad Brownell of being many things, but nobody will ever accuse him of being a bad defensive coach.
Yeah.
I think Clemson's, generally speaking, they're always a tough physical. They play a tough physical brand of basketball. Yeah. And in ways, they like remind me of Virginia Tech under Greenberg with less talent.
Yeah.
Like they play, generally speaking, good defense, and they're physically tough and things like that. They just haven't had the Delaney's and the Jeff Allens and things like that. But probably going to get them again on Wednesday.
It's again, potential revenge game. Like,
revenge game.
I mean, look, and again, I know we'll probably get into this in a second, but like, if you're Virginia Tech, that's a game you have to win.
Yes,
like that was a must win, and that was a quadrant 2 loss at Clemson.
Right.
But this is a game. You know, I'm surprised, but also you got to take into account that there were 13 bubble teams that played on Saturday, and a lot of them lost. It wasn't just Virginia Tech.
Yeah, a lot of them lost on Saturday, but then a lot of them won yesterday.
Yeah, so Tech has not, in Joe Lunardi, ESPN, in his latest projections, Tech is still the bottom team in the next 4 out. So Tech's 4 spots off the bubble. The team 5 spots behind, so next is Virginia, and Virginia has obviously got a chance to pick up some meaty wins, some resume building wins up in Brooklyn. But if you're Virginia Tech, you slip up, your season's done.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we don't know whether Saturday's Clemson game was a must-win game or not, but we know this one is.
Yeah.
Now, if Tech wins the next 2 or 3 or whatever and makes the NCAA tournament, then obviously the one we said was a must-win on Saturday wasn't a must-win, right? Yeah. Lunardi. He works for ESPN, so he's the most famous of the bracketologists. But if you read the bracket matrix, bracket matrix has like 110 different brackets every year. And historically, they rank each one of their bracketologists based on how accurate they are. And Lunardi ranks like 55th.
Yeah.
He's like right in the middle.
There are a lot more accurate guys, and I do recommend it. It's a very interesting site to look at. But bottom line is, this is a game Virginia Tech has to win because – and if you do win, Notre Dame right now on a neutral floor is a quadrant 1 win. You get another chance at a team you've beaten the last 3 times you played them, and you beat them, I don't want to say handily, but you outplayed them in Castle Coliseum earlier this year.
So last thing on the Clemson game before we get into the tournament talk, PJ Hall is one of those players that you're going to clench your fist at each time you play him because he was so close to being a Hokie, ultimately chose the Tigers and was a big reason why they prevailed on Saturday. Of course, he was dealing with a foot injury for a couple games, and of course he came back for this game and led them in points to win. So you think that maybe Virginia Tech could have got it done if PJ Hall was not there. But want to go ahead and talk about the tournament. We obviously have gotten into it a little bit, but who should Tech fans be pulling for in the NC State-Clemson game? Do you want to play Clemson again to avenge that loss, or do you want to play NC State to also avenge that loss?
When it comes down to it, I think Clemson with P.J. Hall is clearly a better team than NC State. I would personally rather play NC State. Clemson has won, 4 in a row now? Yeah. And now they've got their best player back. They just beat Tech. And it's hard to beat the same team twice in a row or whatever. And Tech would still have the advantage. I mean, Clemson beat Tech by 4.
Tech is still a better team.
Right. So, I mean, I feel good about whatever game. But, I mean, when it comes down to it, NC State finished, dead last. Dead last in the ACC.
4-16.
Right. And right now, it doesn't matter who Virginia Tech beats on Wednesday. They just have to win.
Yeah, I think Clemson's the better matchup. Or NC State, sorry. NC State is a better matchup because Clemson is the better team. I will say this, though. NC State, both times Virginia Tech and NC State have played this year, Tech, it went down to the wire, and NC State gave Tech fits. Right. And I think it's a kind of just a style thing. Again, NC State's a very physical team, has a lot of athletes. Darian Sebron, who won Most Improved Player of the Year in the ACC, was a second-team All-ACC player. Yeah. He's really good. I think it's a lot like a Georgia Tech, a Pitt, where they've got a couple guys with talent. Michael DeVoe, Georgia Tech, got a guy that can really score the ball, but outside of that, can they put together the pieces? I think NC State's the team you want to play because I think that's a team you got to think mentally too. Like
they've lost 10 out of 11.
NC
They're
State team,
checked out.
Yeah, I mean
Clemson is not checked out. Clemson to me, I think they like their coach and they're trying to make sure he doesn't get fired.
Yeah. I think NC State. Well, NC State already said Kevin Keats is coming back for another year. But I think this is a team. It's a very young NC State team. if they win, yeah, and I think that's another thing to talk about too. Whoever wins is going to have a lot of momentum coming into the first game. You played a game, you can be hot, but this NC State team, you got to imagine, I don't think they will match Tech this time around, punch for punch, blow for blow, because if you got a Clemson team that's, that, like you said, still has a lot to fight for. This NC State team, you give them a punch, you go on a 10-0 run, and you're up 10. NC State, what do they have to play for?
Exactly, and think about it. They've lost 10 out of 11. So if Virginia Tech ends up playing NC State, that will mean NC State won the game before. So what are the chances NC State would win 2 games in a row when they've only won one of their last 11? It just doesn't. Again, I'm a law of averages type.
Yeah.
So I would rather play NC State.
Well, looking at Virginia Tech's side of the bracket, they would have to win that game and then also beat Notre Dame to make it into the semifinals, where likely North Carolina would await. And with the way that they played on Saturday, I don't know if this is a favorable place for the Hokies to be.
Playing North Carolina, you're going to have to shoot it well, obviously. And Virginia Tech, honestly, both games they played North Carolina this year, they played pretty well in the first meeting, but they ran out of gas down the stretch. And again, that was their second game coming off the COVID break. And honestly, I think they outplayed North Carolina in Castle. They just didn't make their shots. Duke's defensively, Duke was horrendous the other night. They could not stop the ball. Those Carolina guards were just getting in the lane at will and either scoring or passing.
Well, it's hard when it's a track meet.
Yeah, exactly. I think Carolina is better suited for a game against Duke. But if you don't let Carolina get out and run, then you're okay. And Tech would not, unless they turn it over, they wouldn't let North Carolina get out and run. So I wouldn't feel terrible about a matchup with North Carolina. Tech certainly wouldn't be the favorite.
Yeah,
but I would rather play. I'd rather play them than Duke.
Yeah,
sure.
I don't think it's a. I think seeing the way Tech played North Carolina when the two were playing in Castle, just a couple weeks ago, Tech, I think, played better basketball.
Yeah, I would agree.
Tech got the open looks. Tech defended. I think Tech has been one of the best teams, in defending Armando Bacot all season long, who finished second in ACC Player of the Year voting. First team all ACC, got the most votes. He's such an animal, both on the boards. He had 20 rebounds in that first meeting. Second meeting, Tech did a much better job of rebounding and a much better job defending him.
He didn't score in the first half of that game, if you remember.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it was the other role players, the Brady Mannix, who, just came out, hit a couple shots, and
anytime Maliki Black makes a shot, it's a
bonus. and also Tech missing shots, Tech getting wide open looks and just not falling. Who knows if Tech and North Carolina played again, if the Hokies would hit more shots. But you also got to think, the other team, one of the other teams in the bracket on that side is Virginia. Virginia's the 6th seed. I wouldn't count out the Cavaliers. They have a lot to play for. They're playing pretty good basketball as of late. They can give North Carolina a run for their money. How cool would a Virginia Tech semifinal in Brooklyn be?
Mm-hmm.
Both teams have everything to play for, 2 bubble teams.
That would be fun.
So, and Tech, obviously they split earlier this season. So, I don't know. I think it's Tech's not on Duke's side of the bracket, so it's a very favorable path.
Okay. Virginia Tech still sitting on the tournament bubble. David, you said in your Clemson recap article that 22 wins would likely get Virginia Tech into the tournament, which would mean that they are in the ACC championship game, a place that they've never been before. So what are your expectations for them going into Brooklyn, and is that a possibility?
I think so, just because of the bracket's favorable. The only team Tech doesn't match up well against is Duke, and I think that's mostly just because Duke has better athletes.
Oh, yeah, nobody matches up.
Nobody matches up well against, except for Carolina. I think Carolina is the one team that has the talent to match up with Duke.
Yeah, and the thing is that series this year was so weird. Carolina won by double digits in Cameron and Coach K's last game, but the first meeting in the Dean Dome, Duke destroyed them.
Yeah. I think that first game, that the game on Wednesday night at 7:00, that first game will decide everything for Virginia Tech. If Virginia Tech can win that game, I think it can build up momentum. And Notre Dame, this is kind of a situation where Virginia Tech's better than a 7 seed, and I'm not going to say Notre Dame's not as good as a 2 seed because Notre Dame's played very good basketball.
Right.
But I think those teams are closer. It's more of like a 4-5 matchup than a 2-7, and this is a favorable stretch here for Virginia Tech. And again, I think two wins could get you in that conversation.
Depending on what everybody
It all
else
depends
does.
on what happens with all the other bubble teams. It hurts when Memphis goes out and blows out Houston yesterday, but it also helps. It also helps you when Indiana doesn't win at Purdue.
Right.
There's some games that are going to help you, and some games that are going to hurt you.
And I think Indiana and Michigan are probably going to play each other in the Big Ten tournament early, and like the loser of that game could get knocked off the bubble. Because when it comes down to it, Michigan still only won 17 games.
Yeah,
and only one team like in the last 15 or 20 years.
I think since 2006.
Yeah,
right?
has made the NCAA tournament with 17 wins. Yeah. As an at-large, So they've got great computer metrics and everything like that Virginia Tech. But if they get stuck on 17 wins, they're not going.
Yeah, I think to your question, Katie, I think it's achievable, and we just saw Tech rip off 9 wins in 11 games. They're hot. It's hard to win in the ACC. We've said it before. It's hard to put together a run, but that's March. And it honestly comes down to, can this team win 2? I think 2 games gets you in the conversation again. I think 3 wins solidifies you, because then you will have 2 more quadrant 1 wins.
Yeah. 3 wins would be a definite lock.
Yeah. I think 2 wins does it.
I think 2 wins would be probable.
Yeah,
in my opinion. Not definite, but probable.
Yeah, I think 2 wins gets you in that conversation, and then it comes down to what other teams are doing. But this is a tournament that's favorable for Virginia Tech. You don't have to play Duke. You don't even have to play a Miami team that Miami might be, in my opinion, Miami's the second most talented team in the conference, because just of the style they play. They defend you really, really well, and they have a lot of guys that can score. North Carolina, I don't think, plays that great defense against a team like Tech.
Right.
I think this is a favorable matchup. It's just, can the Hokies get hot? Wednesday against Clemson or NC State, it's going to come down to physicality, and you're going to have to carry that forward.
Yeah, you think about it, like Tech, to get to the semifinals, will have to play the number 2 seed. And this year, the number 2 seed is Notre Dame. Generally, the number 2 seed in the ACC tournament, you're thinking about that team has Elite 8 or Final 4 potential, maybe even national championship potential. And you don't think that way with Notre Dame. They're not even ranked in the top 25. So, I think, yes, it's favorable for Virginia Tech, but it's kind of favorable for every other ACC team, too.
That's true.
Because there's just not a definite, besides Duke.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I look at some of these teams like, how did Boston College win 6 ACC games this year? Because the conference isn't very good.
Yeah.
I think as bad as NC State is, like in a normal ACC year, they would have only won like 2 games instead of 4. So I think it's open for a number of teams to make a run, and Virginia Tech is one of those teams.
Yeah, I'm sure Virginia and North Carolina are both sitting there licking their chops going, all right, we got a chance at this too.
Absolutely.
Same with Notre Dame.
Yeah, sure.
Well, Selection Sunday is officially 6 days away, so we'll have to see on how the Hokies fare in the ACC tournament, on if they're going to get in. We'll get into women's basketball after the break, but first there was a cool media opportunity earlier last week where all 10 assistant coaches from football sat down with members of the media for some interviews. You both were there. Kind of want to talk about what that experience was like to be able to sit down with all those coaches.
It was very long. 3.5 hours.
Before a basketball
Before the Louisville game. Yeah, it was very, very, very long. All those guys were good speakers, I thought. I thought Marv was really good. I thought Sean Quinn, he actually talks like a head coach, which he has been before. Stu Holt's kind of your James Shebist / Charlie Wiles.
He's got a southern drawl, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Recruiting Western North Carolina is probably ideal for his personality.
Suit,
yeah, exactly. Goodness. I've never really talked to Pearson Prelo before.
Yeah,
I met him once briefly with a friend of mine who played on the same team.
Fantastic guy. I know him really well. He's an awesome guy.
It's a staff that top to bottom can talk. I don't think from like a communication standpoint they're going to have an issue with recruiting or anything like that. And it was interesting. I asked Joe Rudolph about recruiting Pennsylvania and Ohio because that's where he's recruited in the past for Wisconsin and Pitt. He answered my question, but before answering my question, he made it very, very clear that recruiting in the state of Virginia is very, very important. So it's like they're all trying to say that. Right, exactly. So they want to make that very, very clear that they're going to recruit the state of Virginia. Sean Quinn, probably the biggest statement of the night for me. And I'm going to write a recruiting article later this week. I just have to go through all those hours of tape and transcribe everything. Sean Quinn's, I asked him about recruiting a new territory, because recruiting Northern Virginia is new for him. Yeah, he said in the 50-plus high schools in his areas, he went and shook the hand of every single head coach. And that's some Jim Kavanaugh level stuff right there for you old school Tech fans that go back to the 90s and 2000s of Jim Kavanaugh recruiting. And so it's good to see. I think they understand what's important as far as building relationships. And I got a text from a high school coach. It was at one of their coaching clinics in Norfolk last week, and he said, yeah, this staff, they really, really get it. So I think all the relationships are there. And part of me is like, gosh, I wish we had these guys 10 years ago when it started to drop off. I'm a little bit worried that they won't be as effective now as they would be in the past because of NIL.
Yeah.
Because what if it comes down to we have a great relationship with a running back from Northern Virginia, and he's down to Virginia Tech and Penn State, and what if Penn State develops a history of getting their starting running back a whole lot of NIL money and Virginia Tech doesn't? Well, you can throw the relationships out the window at that point because it's all about money. So I wish we'd had something like this about 10 years ago when Virginia Tech's in-state recruiting really started to drop off to a certain extent. But that said, relationships do matter. They still matter a lot. And I think this is I don't think they could have done much better than the staff they put together as far as that goes.
Yeah, one point on the recruiting front, that'd be something not exactly the same, but somebody like Sam Pendleton, the offensive lineman from Western North Carolina, has family ties to Virginia Tech, and he's probably going to end up choosing Clemson.
Well, yeah, he has family ties to Virginia Tech. I think his mom went to Tech, and he grew up an NC State fan himself. So really, his top three are Tech, NC State, and Clemson, but Clemson is considered the heavy favorite, right? He knows less about Clemson than he does those two other schools. He has fewer relationships with Clemson, yet he's still considered a Clemson lean. And, I was reading, there's a guy named Jordan Hall who goes to IMG Academy, and he's a 4-star linebacker. He's originally from Fredericksburg, where he played for James Monroe, and Virginia Tech was his first scholarship offer under Justyn Fuente. And I read an interview with him recently. He's like, man, yeah, I love Virginia Tech. They'll always be a special school for me because they gave me my first scholarship offer. But they said, but the bottom line is, they don't win enough. And he's a class of 2023 guy. Virginia Tech's not going to have an opportunity to win a whole bunch of football games before he makes his decision. So Virginia Tech is, for the most part, going to have to win and develop with 3-star recruits before they start landing upper-level 4-star guys. And that was the truth under Justyn Fuente, and it's going to be the truth in the initial stages of the Brent Pry era too, because there's so many. When you're a relationship type of coach, as Brent Pry is, he's coming in and he's recruiting against guys in a lot of cases, and he's just developing the relationship. Whereas, let's say he's recruiting against North Carolina or NC State for a Richmond guy or a 757 guy, or especially the 757. The 757 guys will have known the North Carolina staff and even the NC State staff for several years now. Would not probably know very much about Brent Pry. Now, it's a little bit different in Richmond because he was actively recruiting Richmond and Northern Virginia for Penn State. But, I think, I don't know if I expect a huge recruiting jump, because Tech signed a borderline top 25 class this year. And generally speaking, I can think of one time ever where Virginia Tech signed a top 20 class. And so this class, Justyn Fuente, surprisingly, his last class, considering he was on the hot seat, signed a recruiting class that was on par with Tech's, from a rankings perspective, with Tech's normal recruiting classes under Frank Beamer. I don't know if I expect a huge jump in year one of Brent Pry, but I do expect maybe a better targeting of specific players, and basically I expect better player development to go back to that old topic.
Yeah, well, and I think it was interesting to hear them talk about recruiting. I think it was interesting to hear them talk about player development. I think the thing that stood out to me the most was just so many different backgrounds, not one single coach. And you always think you can go back to this at Virginia Tech, even with Buzz Williams taking his assistants to Texas A&M with them after bringing them from Marquette. You can go to even Justin Fuente, bringing some of his Memphis assistants. Brent Pry didn't bring anybody. Brent Pry brought connections.
Right.
And he brought, Chris Marv, a guy he coached at Vanderbilt. Tyler Bowen, a guy he coached with at Penn State. Obviously, he knew J.C. Price and Pearson Prelu from Virginia Tech from being a grad assistant. But Stu Holt, they've got the Western Carolina connection. Brad Glenn and Joe Rudolph are the two guys, they had never crossed paths before. But you look at a guy like Fontel Mines, worked for Rick Urani, who was the offensive coordinator at Penn State when Pry was the defensive coordinator. Sean Quinn, they coached together, in two places, Louisiana Lafayette and Georgia Southern. So many different connections, and to hear the guys talk about, and that was kind of a recurring question I asked, to hear the guys talk about their connections and what it's like in those meeting rooms with so many different ideas and all these different kind of just everybody's throwing stuff at the wall and then they're picking the best stuff. It's very intriguing because it's it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna be your normal offense, your normal defense, or whatever. It's gonna be like a mesh of all these ideas.
Right, and I think that's important. When Fuente came here, he retained Bud and Charlie, and then brought his Memphis guys.
Yeah.
So there's no new ideas when you hire staff like that, because Bud and Charlie had been here for a couple of decades. They're not really going to have any new ideas. And then the whole Memphis staff had already been coaching together for Memphis. There was nobody hired from the outside at another school saying, we were doing this at Wisconsin and this might work here. Now, you got to be careful that you don't have too many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak. But I do think he's, not only from a regional recruiting standpoint, but from a coaching standpoint, you bring in guys that can cover a whole lot of bases. I think I really like the way he put together his staff from a recruiting standpoint. You've got a state of Virginia focus, but it's not like all 10 guys
have recruited
Virginia with no experience in Ohio or North Carolina or the Southeast. You've got Derek Jones and Sean Quinn, who've recruited the Southeast a lot, and you've got Joe Rudolph, who's recruited Pennsylvania and Ohio a lot, and you've got Tyler Bowen that has recruited Maryland a lot. So they did a really good job putting their painting the map. So to speak, with guys and experience in each of those areas.
Yeah.
Last thing before we toss it over to Nick, we are in the midst of winter conditioning, even though it's a beautiful 70 degrees in Blacksburg today. The hunger drills is what Coach Pry has come up with to name these workouts. What did you think of the list of victors that were announced after the first 2 weeks?
Okay, so we have the week 1 hunger drill winners. I'll read them off one by one. Jordan McDonald, Nasir Peoples, Connor Blumrick, Caleb Smith, Dax Holyfield, Wilfred Panay, Cole Nelson, Peter Moore, Nick Gallo, Jalen Holston, Nadir Thompson. Week 2 winners, Jordan McDonald, Will Ross, who's a specialist, Caden Moore, Grant Wells, Dwayne Lofton, Bryce Duke, Will Johnson, Drake Dulius, Cole Nelson, Mario Kendricks, Breon Murray, Nike Hawkins. 2 guys have won in both weeks, Jordan McDonald and Cole Nelson. So to me, those 2 guys, you put them into the starting lineup when spring practice starts. Because I just, Jordan McDonald is playing the Sam linebacker spot, and Cole Nelson is a defensive end. I think that's how you establish your program culturally. Is these guys, they busted their butts more than anybody else in the offseason, so they deserve first crack at those starting positions. Now, it's up to them to keep them by their performance, but it's only fair, I believe, that they be given first crack at it. And I can't tell if they're naming one guy at each position, because in some spots it's there's one defensive end per week, there's one defensive tackle per week, there's one different quarterback per week, there's one different tight end per week. But at the same time, there was no offensive lineman in week 1, but there was one in week 2.
I wonder if they
that might have just been Joe Rudolph's saying, you know what, nobody deserved one.
Well,
this week.
I also wonder if it's just you split them up into you just kind of split them up into different groups.
Right.
I don't know if it's the wide receivers all compete against each other or something like that.
So who knows? But to me, because you have 2 starting cornerback positions on your team, right? Well, you got Breon Murray winning week 2, and you got Nadir Thompson winning week 1. So as of right now, those are my 2 starting cornerbacks when spring practice starts. And I know they're not Tech's 2 best corners. because Tech's two best corners are, in my opinion, Dorian Strong and Armani Chapman. But I think when you're trying to establish a culture, these guys have earned it with their hard work, right? Now, I'm confident that probably Chapman and Strong would eventually win those positions. But I think it would fire a shot across everybody else's bow that say, look, hard work is rewarded in this program, and that's how you run a football program at the highest level. People will talk about recruiting and blah blah blah, but this is how that's how you win football games is the off-season culture, and all coaches say that. All coaches pay that lip service, but I think not all coaches really treat it like they should. I think that was Virginia Tech's biggest issue under Fuente, is not holding enough guys accountable for things like that.
Were there running backs on that list?
Yes.
Bryce Duke.
Jalen Holston in week 1 and Bryce Duke in week 2.
Which is interesting because I was just going to touch on this. Stu Holt, I thought Stu Holt was one of the most interesting guys to talk to. And somebody asked him kind of just about where the running backs are right now and if anybody stood out. He mentioned Jalen Holston and Bryce Duke.
Those were his first two guys he mentioned.
So there's,
I would be very surprised if Bryce Duke doesn't play this year. Yeah. Always be redshirt.
I know. I can see Will smiling back behind there.
But Bryce Duke is going to be physically ready to play. Yeah. And he's more physically ready as a guy who should still be in high school right now. He's more physically advanced than Keshawn King, who's been in the program for 3 years. He's more physically advanced than some of those other backs in the program, and I think he'll see the field this year. Holston will be interesting. He's always been one of the hardest working guys in the program, no question. But then you get into actual on-field production. I mean, he basically got benched halfway through the season this past year. So we'll see. And obviously there's Malachi Thomas, who played well for Virginia Tech.
Very well.
He's the one that put Jalen Holston on the bench.
But Stu Holt did say, he'd like to, and I will read this. I have my list of notes. Mm-hmm. Stu Holt said he prefers, because somebody asked him about the rotation. He said, depends on what you're going with. He would like ideally six backs. Usually,
not in the rotation, but on the roster.
Well, yes. Sorry, on the roster. But in terms of rotation, he usually says somebody's usually going to separate themselves.
Yes.
So, but he's going to go with the hot hand, and he kind of mentioned the three attributes he really likes that stand out. You're tough enough in between the tackles, you don't get caught, and you got good vision. So, and he said it's hard to find a combination of the three, but there's definitely going to be a lot of finding out. Spring.
He had 5 1,000-yard rushers in 4 years at App State. So that means 1 year he had 2 backs go for 1,000 yards. And he went over each one of those running backs with the media. And he said not one of those backs met every single one of his criteria. But they all met like 2 of his 3. Or 3 of his 4 or whatever it was.
3,
yeah. So, you don't have to be perfect to have like really good production as a running back. I think if we look back in 4 years from now and say, hey, Tech had 5. I don't think we're going to say Tech had 5 1,000-yard rushers in 4 years. I'll take it if they do. But, he's got some I don't want to use the term weeding out, but that's kind of what it is because you've got 9 running backs on the roster, which is, by his admission, 3 too many.
Yeah.
All right, before we take our break, we'll go ahead and toss it over to Nick in the 4th chair. What do you have for us today, Nick?
Just a few Scott Glessner stats. The first one's a toss-up, really. Tech is 7-5. I'm going to talk basketball first. 7-5 in their opening ACC games after losing the regular season game. I mean, that's 50-50. Whatever. That's just whatever the seed was that year. And then Virginia Tech has only had 1 year, 2016, the NIT year, of winning the last 4 regular season games in the ACC. They're also 5-13 in their last regular season games of the ACC.
Wow.
So since being in the ACC, they've only won 5 of them, which is pretty fascinating to think about. I mean, you had that stretch between 2009 and 2012, pretty darn good, but they dropped 2 in the 2011 one.
After beating Duke. And, you're definitely in the NCAA tournament.
That kicked them out of the tournament. No. And then you have the Buzz era, and you still don't have a lot. I don't know. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think that's very interesting. I was also going to mention ACC Tournament has haunted Tech in the past.
Yeah.
Just like
Brooklyn has haunted Tech in the past.
just what was specifically like one of the teams Tech might play is Notre Dame. Last time Tech played Notre Dame in the ACC tournament,
Bonzie Colston.
Was that the
Bonzie Colston, and they had
lead?
the point guard. I forget. I can't remember his name.
I remember Bonzie Colston had been hurt. Remember?
Yeah,
and he came back for
game.
the Tech game, and he was way out of shape. And Tech had a big lead at halftime.
It was
and yet
20-point plus or something. Like that.
He was running on fumes. I don't
Yeah.
know. Still don't know how Tech managed to lose that game.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, just in terms of the ACC tournament, I mean, I was in Charlotte in 2019 when Florida State hit that dagger, and then there's the Tyler Hansborough, and the list just goes on and on and on. So.
Yeah, so
Thanks for those memories.
Well, and then Brooklyn, everybody's like, "Oh, don't worry, Tech will get used to the Brooklyn for the tournament and the preseason tournament," and then they get smacked by Memphis.
Xavier,
and then
Memphis.
lose to Xavier. So sums up with New York, and then I know Katie wanted me to touch on this. Of course, you can't go over the combine without mentioning that the 40-yard dashes. Now, I will say when I read that Amari Barno broke the D-line record, I'm like, I don't know. He's going to play linebacker in the NFL. Outside linebacker. But then he broke the linebacker 40-yard dash. I was well with that, too. I'm like, holy crap, okay.
Tremendous
That's legit.
athlete.
That's legit. So at 4.37, and then Trey Turner with the Wendy special 4.44.
Yeah. Good on them.
Yeah, I mean, props to him with that. I know.
Barno also looked like he was bulked up a little bit in the upper body.
Yeah,
he was listed
he
at
did look
246, and I think he was listed at 240 at Tech this past year.
Yeah, he looked a little stronger.
So he's bulked up. Some of those other guys, I don't know what they did the last 3 months since they left Virginia Tech. Like how do you go from being listed at 190 to 179 as a wide receiver? How is Jermaine Waller 175 pounds?
Did you do it? Yeah, what were you doing?
I don't know. I'm just so ready to close the book on that old era of strength and conditioning and move on to a new one.
But yeah, I thought that was. It's not big time in the long run, but it still puts hey, Virginia Tech, that's still name recognition out there, and I know speed isn't everything, but that boosts a lot of draft stock, and that is
especially
the number one thing.
Especially when you're a
combine.
D-lineman.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, there were a few. I was going to save them towards the end. You mentioned a lot of them for a little bit about like Keve Aluma or Mutts coming back, and then what was here we go. Shoot, there was one that you already mentioned. Oh yeah, what do they have to do in the ACC tournament?
There you go. Katie asked your questions clearly.
And then, but there is one here, Mr. Coleman, for you. With the return of Mr. Ferguson, is there any hope of a traditional fullback role under Coach Bowen?
No.
And
the fullback role is
dead in college football.
Yeah, for the most. I mean, I don't think you can isolate you can have a fullback, but he also needs to be a tight end and an H-back. And these days, your H-backs do what your fullbacks were going to do. So
a Connor Blumrick role?
Yeah. Nah, he would have to put on. People talk about him in that role, but he's 6'5", 215.
Yeah.
That's outside receiver size. That's not.
And more of a tight
size.
end.
And besides, Tech's already got 2 good tight ends.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is gonna be a little tangent right here, but I always find it fascinating that 6'5". That's pretty tall. That's a good height, really great height for a wide receiver. That's
For tight end. That's
like
nothing.
that's a 2 for a 2 guard in college basketball. I just think it's so funny how Sean Padula is a pretty solid height for a wide receiver.
Right.
It's always weird seeing them line up next to each other.
Well, I remember going to the first basketball game this season and seeing Couture and Naheem Aline, and I'm like, outside of Caleb Smith, those guys look more like outside receivers than are actual outside receivers on the football team.
They're
Strength and conditioning.
But that's all I've got for right now. I have more to talk about for ACC women's basketball now. Dave and I had a very fun time down there this weekend.
Yeah,
so
which we'll get to after the break. We're going to go ahead and take a break here on episode 228 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, which is brought to you by the Southeast Regional Training Center. And when we come back, we'll talk women's hoops and softball. Make sure you stay with us here on episode 228 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us here on episode 228 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Moving on to women's basketball, this team is so much fun to root for. They got the dreaded 5 seed going into the tournament after dropping that close one to NC State at home, which had them taking on Clemson, who they dominated in the first half, but the main takeaway from this game was losing Kayla King.
Yeah, I know we'll get to the next game. Who do they?
UNC.
Yeah, North Carolina.
How
How could I forget? Yeah. We watch so many basketball games.
Too many.
Yeah, I mean, just, it didn't look. It's not too bad. I think it's just she's just in a boot right now. It's her right ankle.
She wasn't even wearing a boot before the NC State game.
Yeah,
she just had it wrapped up.
She and obviously we'll get to it, but Elizabeth Kitley, got hurt right shoulder in the North Carolina game, and so you lose 2 of your starters. But that Clemson game, Virginia Tech played really well. I mean, this is a Clemson team they dominated by 30 a couple weeks ago, and Kayla King going out was just one of many injuries in Greensboro for Tech. But the good news is, she wasn't wearing a ankle brace or anything, even a boot, the other day when she was warming up for the NC State game. So that's good news.
Yeah, and Coach Kenny Brooks obviously said, we didn't want to risk anything. I think they just put Kitley and King in warm-ups to be like, hey, NC State, look who we have.
I also think they wanted to see him go
get
through
get loose and, not have him just sit on the sideline, stay cold. So I think they'll both be back for the NCAA tournament. And when King went out, you still had Kitley, so you still felt fine, going into UNC. You're like, don't worry, we've got plenty of guard depth. Kiana Traylor, by the way, was absolutely fantastic. I think she averaged 17, 18 points during the tournament. Unbelievable. Second team all-tournament. But, so without King, you had the depth in guard. You were fine. Even brought in Taylor Guyman at one point as well, too, in the NC State game. But then you lose Kitley with 0.3 seconds left to go in the first quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, it was this close from not even happening. And then that freak accident happens, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, crap. We're down 8 going into halftime against UNC without Kitley, the player of the year. I mean, that got crazy.
But they play. I will say, you got to give them credit. They played a heck of a tournament. I know we're going to get into the North Carolina game. That was crazy. The North Carolina game was a mess. Were you on the call for that one?
I was on the call for that.
Yeah, so Nick was on the call for 33-4 for that one. But, I mean, that just I don't know if you were watching, Katie, but that was just craziness. The fact that Tech's without King, without Kitley,
they were down 8 at halftime.
And march all the way back. And then Georgia Amore, slices through the defense, cuts to the rack, lays it up, which is a couple seconds left. Then North Carolina calls timeout, inbounds from the front court, and Alyssa Usby what a shot.
Yeah.
And then it goes to overtime, and then Tech dominates North Carolina in overtime without 2 starters.
14 free throws in the overtime period. Now, of course, I know UNC was fouling a little bit at the end, but still they drew so many penalties. We thought that game was the craziest game. We're like, wow, that's one of the best basketball games we ever watched. And then 2 games later, Louisville
Miami,
is up 15 on Miami with 4 minutes to go, and somehow they lose that game at a buzzer beater. I mean, that was unbelievable. I mean, the tournament was just fantastic all around. They were great games. But, I was so proud of how they battled back, not only just being down, but without 2 starters, player of the year in the ACC, Kitley, and still managed to come back. They gave up 8 or 9 offensive rebounds in the first half to UNC. Only 2 in the second half, and then I think 1 or 2 in overtime.
2 in overtime.
So that defense adjustment, and they switched to a zone, and that really locked down UNC's glass and rebounding right there. But then NC State. I mean, UNC's good, don't get me wrong, top 10 in the net. I think top 5 in the net as well, but NC State's just a different animal altogether. You go in, and I will say they held their ground really, really well up until halftime, but you need Kitley for that one, and I'd argue you also need King for that. Even though Kayla Traylor's fantastic, you just don't have the depth, and they're exhausted. I mean, Georgia Amore played all 45 minutes of the UNC game, did not sit down, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, you got to go." By the way, against, you could argue one of the best, probably the best team in the country, I think personally, NC State.
Reeling it back towards that UNC game, definitely maybe one of the best ACC women's tournament games to date. But then, of course, you have Louisville losing. Georgia Amore and Asia Shepherd both with 22 points, Traylor with 19. I think it really speaks to the depth that Kenny Brooks has been able to establish on this team and just the culture of them as a whole and really wanting to play for each other. Speak on, the impact of that.
Yeah, well, I think Kiana Traylor, we've seen her be really, really good, but Kenny's talked about this so many times. She's a player that was an all Big Ten guard at Purdue, and yet she decides to come to Virginia Tech, and she's going to go to her first ever NCAA tournament, when Tech gets selected next week. And this is somebody who hasn't started all season, really. I mean, she's started here and there in spots when Tech's needed her to, but hasn't been a consistent starter, and she needed to start, multiple games over the past couple of days, and she did well. Really provided an extra effort. Taylor Guyman came out and played well. Emily Lytle's defense was fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Tech was down in so many different ways, and I think it was a turning point. I think it might end up being a turning point in their season, just the way that they were so. They could have been beaten. They could have given up in so many different ways. I mean, you're down at halftime without your player of the year and without another starter, and you find a way to come back and win. That just speaks to the togetherness of this team. And if they can keep the ball rolling when Elizabeth Kitley and Kayla King do get healthy, which I believe will be for the NCAA tournament, they'll be in really good shape.
I saw Kitley, King, and Amore. They were all sitting mid-court, about 2 rows up for the championship game, and they both, all three of them, just looked depressed down in the dumps. And it was hard to see, but that they're going to come out and guns blazing in the NCAA tournament. And what was neat was, the men, they have to battle in the ACC tournament to even just get a bid in the NCAA tournament. Meanwhile, the girls are fighting for home court advantage. And you already know, they've got a lock in the NCAA tournament, so it's just like, do you want that home court advantage? And, I mean, it all comes down to seeding, and if the committee's like, well, I think they do deserve for it. Right now they're on that 5, I think they're 5 seed.
They're 5 seed.
Lay's bracketology. So there's still hope that they could get it, but that's up to the committee. But, yeah, that UNC game, it really just showed how good Virginia Tech is, top to bottom. You take out Kitley, and Virginia Tech started rebounding better than without Kitley. And Emily Lytle emerged. And Emily Lytle came in 1,100 points plus at her Liberty career, first team conference, ASUN or whatever Liberty's in. And you had high hopes for her. She had a few all right games, and she only scored 4 against UNC, but she got an offensive rebound and clutch time off of a missed free throw and a putback to, I think, tie the game at one point or something like that. It was either an overtime or regulation.
The game was tied, and after free throws from Deasia Gregg. And I asked Kenny Brooks about it, and he said that was the turning point of the game. But
yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then Asia Shepherd, who her 5th year, yes, she won the accolades. She's all-time scorer, all-time three-point leader in the ACC. But it was such a down year compared to her other years, shooting percentage-wise. I mean, if I could have, you look at Naheem Aline and her shooting numbers, kind of similar compared to last year's. But then she goes unbelievable. And in the tournament, UNC, she hit 3 free throws with like a minute and a half left or something. Tech's down 3. She hits all 3 free throws to tie the game. And then she's hitting fadeaway threes, unbelievable. Like, she looked like her old self again, and that's what you want, of course, going into the NCAA tournament. And they really hit their stride. NC State, it sucks to lose that game, and it sucks to not get to the championship. But I mean, that Westmore has just built an unbelievable program down there at Raleigh. That even losing how they did in the semifinals, I thought was admirable for how they fought in the first half, and then even in the third quarter.
Speaking on that NC State game, the Hokies really started out good on defense. Elisa Cunane was only 3 of 11 in shooting, and going into halftime, it was only a 4-point game. You start to think that maybe they can pull this one out, even without Liz Kitley and without Kayla King, but NC State really took control in the second half.
Cunane won tournament player of the. She was she proved that she was good, and she had double-double there and was, I think, 1 or 2 rebounds shy of another double-double in the championship game. And she's unstoppable. And without Kitley down there, Deasia Gregg she's good, very athletic, just doesn't match up well. Azana Baines, I will say, had a fantastic first half. She pinned the ball on Cunane 2 or 3 times in the first half, some big-time blocks. But Cunane's she's a Wooden Award watch list finalist for a reason. She's top 4 players right now in the country, and she just asserted her dominance, and Virginia Tech just ran out of gas.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't necessarily turnovers as it had been in previous games. It was more of the rebounding. Tech just didn't have the bodies. Tech didn't have the height, and when you take Elizabeth Kitley out of the lineup, it doesn't necessarily hurt. I mean, it hurts because she's so talented. Tech could still find ways to succeed, but the problem was you're now defensively giving up height and size and just rebounding ability. Offensively, I think it kind of let Tech play more fluid because you don't necessarily have to go inside, but you also take away one of your best weapons. So, but the fact that Tech played a really, really close game, and essentially rebounding, I think, was the big difference. NC State just got second chance opportunity, and that's what's going to happen when you're missing, ACC Player of the Year. But NC State showed it yesterday. They won the ACC tournament and 3rd straight championship for Westmore. I mean, that's why they're such a really good team.
Well, with the win in that game, the Hokies would have advanced to the ACC championship game and gotten Miami, who they have beaten before. You hate to talk about the what-ifs, but had Liz Kitley not gotten hurt and had Kayla King not gotten hurt, maybe the confetti would have flown in Virginia Tech's direction.
Yeah, I think Tech, just the way they were playing, I think if the Hokies can replicate the energy, the mentality, the way they played against NC State, the Hokies are going to be a really hard team to beat in the NCAA tournament, simply because they've got the talent, they've got a lot of depth, and then they've got, you have this mentality where it's just we're playing for each other, you can't lose. I think that's something you can't replicate. And, I think if Tech had Kitley and King, I think it probably would have beaten NC State, because I don't think you lose to the same team for a 3rd straight time this season. But and then Miami is hot, but the Hokies, I think, would have been able to handle it. I mean, you're always going to say what if, but that could have been a potential ACC tournament championship. But it happens, and now you move on. And I think in Tech's mind, I think it's really good that the injuries as of now, they don't appear to be crazy serious where players are out for the season. Hopefully everybody's safe and healthy and ready to go by the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and it was a 15-point loss. I mean, you could say, oh, well, Kitley would have given us 12 points and King would have added 6 more or whatever. But I agree with him that you're not going to lose 3 times. Especially how close the first 2 games really were, and you were buzzer beater 3 away from beating them in Blacksburg. But it's just how it is. And then props to Miami, by the way. We were watching that comeback. I leaned over to David and Jack when they went down 15 with 4 minutes ago. I was like, oh, that's ball game against Louisville. And then the 17-0 run. And I've never seen press row or just a collective oh my gosh, when they tied the game and then hit the buzzer. It was unbelievable. So props to them for taking care of Louisville, the 2 seed and number 4 in the country.
Notre
and
Dame,
then
too.
Beating Notre Dame, another top 25 team in the country as well. But again, with them, it was close at halftime, and then NC State pulled away. Getting tired. NC State only had to play 2 games. Before that, they had to play an extra game against, and then they also had to play another top 4 team in the country. That was a gauntlet of a tournament that they had to go through. But still, to get the championship was unbelievable. I thought really the turning point in the Tech-NC State game, there was about a 4-0 run, I think, to start the second half for NC State after Tech got it within 1 with an and 1 by trailer to go up 5 or whatever. And then they got 4 offensive rebounds in 1 possession, and Cunane put it back for an and 1. And I think I counted 3 possessions in the Tech-NC State game, where you talk about rebounding. 4 or 5 offensive rebounds in 1 possession, and it all resulted in second chance points or quadruple chance points or whatever you want to talk about, say call it. But Yeah, I mean, the rebounding. And every three-pointer, if you watch, Tech shot so poorly from behind the arc in that game. Every three came up short. Every single one. And that's all in your legs. And that all comes down. I remember in stupid rec basketball, my dad would yell at me to jump higher. And I didn't understand that. But you get it. You don't think about it when you're shooting. But when the shots are coming up short, it's not in your arms. It's all in your legs.
Well, the women's team did not walk away with an ACC title, but they did walk away with a trio of awards. Georgia Amor was first team ACC All-Tournament team, and then Kiana Traylor and Asia Shepherd both on second team. So they did receive some recognition, which was, I think, the first time that we've ever had 3 on that team.
And the first time Tech's ever had Georgia Amor, first ever player to make first team All-Tournament. So, I mean, that just, again, it's kind of same point, but that just speaks to how good this team is, how much depth they have, and if they're healthy, how much damage they can do in the NCAA tournament.
Did you vote for them to be first team and second team?
I voted for Amor and Traylor. Shepherd was going to be the next choice I had. She didn't have a great game against NC State, but she did play really well against North Carolina. But yeah, it's it's really good. Tech just Tech women's basketball tweeted something out a little bit ago that ESPN put out their power rankings, and the Hokies are 13th, and that just goes to, I mean, that's just national recognition on a big stage. They've played in big games before, but a lot of those were back in the 90s and early 2000s, and now they're kind of getting that national recognition again.
For the men, their tournament hopes are still up in the air, but the women are for sure going dancing. We don't know their seeding yet, but they could potentially be hosting a tournament game in Blacksburg if they make it into the top 16. How cool would that be?
Either host or go to College Park.
Yeah,
because that'd be just a short trip up the road.
That would be nice. Right now, Charlie Cream of ESPN has Tech playing as a 5 seed in Maryland, College Park. Their Maryland would be the 4, but I don't think Tech will host just because. They're better teams, and Tech's right on that edge. If Tech had beaten NC State, they would have definitely. But it would be really cool if that ended up happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's luck of the draw. You just wait till Sunday. You hope you get it. If not, you just hope the game is close then. And then you hope you're in the East bracket because the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 in the East is back at Greensboro.
That'd be nice.
And so that's another just 2.5-hour drive right there that we both made yesterday.
There you go. Well, wrapping up women's basketball and moving on to softball. The softball team also traveled down to Clemson this weekend. In addition to the men's team, they had a better result, walked away undefeated in the series. Definitely an impressive trio of wins for a team who is also ranked in Clemson.
Yeah,
beating them.
Well, and this is a top 15-20 match, and I believe Will tweeted out earlier that in the last 5 times Virginia Tech and Clemson have played in softball, and this is a Clemson program that just started up a couple years ago. Last 5 regular season games per Will. Tech's outscored Clemson 27-4, and I actually know Valerie Cagle, the Clemson pitcher. We grew up a little bit together. She was private schooled, or homeschooled, but she's really, really good. Last year won first team All-American, won ACC Freshman of the Year and ACC Player of the Year. First time it's ever been done before. And she's a really good hitter. She's a really good pitcher. But when she plays a team like Tech, Tech played really, really well. Hit well. The pitching was good. Emma Lemley played the second game, won 6-0, 10 strikeouts, shutout. I mean, that's as good of a performance as you can ask for. Obviously, we know how good Keely Rochard is, but just all around, especially after a midweek loss at Charlotte, who's receiving votes in a lot of the polls, really strong performance this weekend from Tech softball.
And let me jump in here right now and say that the first official softball RPI was released this morning by the NCAA. Guess where Virginia Tech ranks?
I think Will texted
number one. Virginia Tech is number 1 in the RPI in softball.
How about that?
Yeah. Oh, that's but that also goes to
played a really tough schedule,
and that's credit to Pete DeMoore because you played number 1 Alabama twice, or number 2 Alabama twice, and you lost by a combined score of 3-0. You played
at Alabama too.
Yeah, at Alabama. You've played that first tournament. They played 3 Big Ten teams and 2 SEC teams and beat them all. I mean, this is
destroyed them too.
This is a team who they've literally played everybody and 2 of their 3 losses are to the number 2 team in the country. They just swept a ranked Clemson team. I mean, they're really good, and I think it comes down to timely hitting. I mean, that's baseball and softball in general, but in that Alabama series, they lacked a little bit of it. They've lacked a little bit of it at times so far this season. They did it against Charlotte, but this weekend, I think Tech proved really on a national stage how good it can be. We know how good the pitching is, but if the hitting can come together, I think they're going to have a really good season.
Yeah, and you touched on how Clemson's just like this new startup program. They got rid of it. Clemson got rid of it to boost football numbers, and then that worked, and then they got money, so they put Clemson back in. But props to them for building up. They were number 9 in the higher rankings. They're 9-13, so that's still top 13 win, depending on whatever rankings you base yourself off of. So that's a huge boost. I know Virginia Tech will definitely get lifted in the rankings as well, and I guess searching for number 1. Alabama's pretty darn good.
Well, and Oklahoma's number 1.
Oklahoma's good.
Those 2 teams are really
UCLA 's
good.
top
But this is, again, a team that we saw how close they were to going to the College World Series last year. I mean, you keep it up, you'll be I don't know what the softball term is.
And the reason you lost to UCLA last year in the Super Regional was, and you won the first game, but they had lack of pitching depth. UCLA had 3 great pitchers.
But you've got it now.
Now you do. So now you could take on those UCLAs and maybe, I don't know, you could even sweep them in the Super Regional as you get to there. And I know JMU is definitely not even on the level that Tech is, but you saw what JMU did. He got to the World Series last year. And so
a lot of potential.
Tech's a lot more talent. So, I mean, everybody points to wrestling or whatever, but I think softball, man, you want to root for the most successful program at Tech right now? It's going to be softball for a while.
We talk about pitching and how much Keely Rochard is really a cornerstone piece to this program, but how nice is it to be able to put your full confidence also in Emma Lemley so that Keely can have those resting opportunities and you can still have confidence after she tossed a 3-hit shutout on Saturday.
Yeah, well, it's everything. Keely pitched Friday and Keely pitched Friday and Sunday, and before, and again in a series like this, Keely would have had to go every game. Now you've got the luxury of throwing in a pitcher, a freshman, true freshman, mind you, and she doesn't give up a single hit against a top 20 team. I mean, that is not a luxury that a lot of teams have. That just goes to show you recruiting and just development and really how good this team is top to bottom.
Yeah, you lose Keely this year. That sucks. But yeah, with Emma Lemley going up, next 4 years, including this year, you had 1-2 more, then all of a sudden, and of course the name Virginia Tech is starting to get more national recognition all over. If you look at NCAA softball's Twitter account, I mean, yes, they're going to post a lot about Oklahoma and the top dogs, but Virginia Tech's getting a whole lot more national recognition, and like Chris always likes to harp on, name recognition is best for recruiting, and Virginia Tech's certainly getting up there.
Jamie Bailey led the Hokies on at the plate on Friday, going 1 for 3 with the home run and 4 RBIs. She's one of those veteran seniors that's really going to be able to make some noise this season. Yeah,
when she and Kelsey Bennett and Kelsey Brown and Darby Truel, I mean, there are a lot of them. And I think that's the biggest thing. Chip Grubb does a fantastic job covering Tech softball for us, and he was down there. And this is a Tech group that Pete Moore said he's trying to figure out the best combination, because you've got so many veterans that it's really tough to pick out which ones, like, you're trying to find the right combination, which ones mesh the best. But I mean, Jamie Bailey's one of those that really stood out this weekend. Kelsey Bennett's done so. Emma Ritter. I mean, there are a lot of really good players on this team, and that showed this weekend.
Well, after being on the road for their first 17 games, the Hokies will finally have their season opener at home. They return to Blacksburg for a doubleheader against Norfolk State on Wednesday before a series with Syracuse this weekend, so good opportunities to extend that win streak there. Meanwhile, baseball, who's been at home for forever, it seems like, travels down to Atlanta this weekend to take on a really good Georgia Tech team, so that'll be an interesting challenge for them to see how they fare. Before we close, want to get to some of the YouTube questions with Chris, who's actually in the fourth chair now.
Yes.
Is there anything good in the chat, Chris?
There's actually been no new questions in the YouTube chat, but there are some message boards.
What I was going to say, do you want to mention Drue Hackenberg first?
I do want to mention Drue Hackenberg. Thank you for reminding me. True freshman pitcher for Virginia Tech baseball has 3 starts this year. I believe has a 0.83 ERA. 17 innings pitched, only 1 walk.
Whew.
And to me, that's the key to pitching is don't walk people. Like, with metal bats, you're going to give up some hits and some home runs sometimes in college, but just don't walk people and make them 2-run home runs and 3-run home runs and things like that. Obviously, Tech hasn't played the greatest competition so far, although Wright State did win their conference last year.
Yeah.
We'll find out more about Tech's pitching, obviously, this week against Georgia Tech, because that's a team that is always good generally. But Drue Hackenberg so far looks like the real deal. Mm-hmm. Now, scouting reports in baseball can sometimes take a month or two to really get out there and everything, but very optimistic on the start to his career. So.
I think he also had a SportsCenter top 10 play with his over-the-shoulder catch.
Oh.
It was a bounce up in the air, and he caught it and then threw out the...
He can do it all.
Yeah.
Give him a gold glove.
And he's like, I credit my brothers for teaching me how to catch balls overhead.
Yeah. You have I'm gonna bump this, but Chris Hirons actually wrote a good feature on him a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Chris, what subscriber questions do we have?
Subscriber questions. Let's see. Switching gears. Do you think any of the incoming freshman class of defensive linemen will play this year?
That's more of a question for you.
That's true.
Tee yourself up.
Yes. I think a guy like Braylon Moore has the physical capability to play a defensive tackle. I also think Rashad Purnell, and by the way, this was SC Hokie 1103 who asked the question. I also think Rashad Purnell, depending on how big he is, how big he reports, could potentially factor into that 3 technique spot at defensive tackle. Anybody else you would add to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think those are Purnell and Braylon Moore are the 2 guys that. I mean, maybe Gunnar Givens.
Yeah,
if he plays there.
Gunnar Givens will be big enough and strong enough, but to me, Gunnar Givens is Wyatt Teller. He's going to redshirt as a defensive lineman
and then go to offensive lineman. Yeah, that's why.
And I know he probably wouldn't want to hear that, and I don't think I'd want to tell him that, but I think that's what's going to happen. Let's see.
But those are the guys that are really talent. I would say those are the most talented and the guys that fit the most.
And they're like from a strength perspective, like Braylon Moore.
Yeah.
I think should be ready.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the Darren Buchanan commitment by Gretna Hokie?
Oh yeah, I think this is Darren Buchanan, 3-star, 6'7" small forward from Woodrow Wilson High School in Washington D.C. 4th commitment in the class, joining MJ Collins, Patrick Wessler, and Rodney Rice. The one, of course, you can't forget Rodney Rice. I think it's a really good commitment, and I mean, this is obviously, Mike Young hasn't had a chance to have many recruiting classes at Tech, and I still think the transfer portal is going to be a huge deal. But this is a commitment that is really important, I think. He's kind of like David Gasson size, maybe a little bit smaller, but a guy that'll be able to stretch the floor a little bit. Seems like he can shoot pretty well, very athletic. That front court depth is going to be really huge, especially after you use Keve Aluma and Justyn Mutts this year.
Well, he's 6'6", 225, 6'6" or 6'7", depending on who you ask. So he's about the same size as Justyn Mutts.
Yeah.
Now, what I like about him, obviously for his AAU team, he plays off the ball because they've got Rodney Rice on his AAU team. But for his high school team, he plays on the ball. So he basically plays point guard for them.
Yeah.
And averages 3 assists per game. He'll either play the 3 or 4 for Virginia Tech, but I think he's going to play the 4.
Yeah.
So
essentially, you got a guy that can stretch the floor.
He's a guy that on paper should be a good distributor, should be a good passer out of that 4 spot. And we've seen this year how valuable that can be with Justyn Mutts. Yeah. So there was a question on the boards yesterday, what past Tech player does he compare to the most? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you don't want to hold anybody to a high standard before you've ever seen him play before, but just the fact that he plays on the ball in high school makes me believe he can be a little bit of a point forward for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and that would be a guy like Justyn Mutts, or the guy who I compare Justyn Mutts most like to is a guy like Chris Clark. Those guys who are long, athletic, rebound the ball well, can shoot. Not necessarily the best shooters, but have that ability, but are the best passers on the team.
Yep.
And I think 2 days ago, he actually just won the state championship.
Yeah, and he eclipsed 1,000 points last week.
Yeah, in the state championship game. So, I mean, yeah, you pick up a guy who's playing on Rodney Rice's AAU, which, by the way, Rodney is playing top dog AAU. That's not lower level. I don't know, basketball rankings, recruiting are always a little weird in my opinion because it's not really based on how you perform in high school. It's how you show out on the AAU.
Right.
And so Darren has showed out on Rodney Rice's AAU, and well, that's top level right there, traveling across country for that.
I think pretty much everything else in here we've covered. So I think we're done.
Well, lastly, Chris, what's coming up on Tech Sideline for the rest of the week?
Well, I'm going to spend my afternoon transcribing some of those coaching interviews from last week. We have a Brandon Patterson article. Obviously, we'll have a Friday Q&A. Other than that, I'm kind of playing it by ear. It's kind of hard to tell, like, depending on what happens with the ACC tournament and everything like that.
Yeah, I will.
You're busy.
I'm extremely busy. This is I understand now why John Rothstein says we sleep in May. I just got back from Greensboro yesterday. Chris Hirons and I were down there. Nick was also down there for Thursday or 4. I'm going up to Brooklyn. I'm leaving today. Going to drive about 3 hours today and then stay the night, and then only have about 5-hour drive tomorrow to New York. Driving up to Brooklyn. I'll be there all week with everything you know about Virginia Tech, of course. Hokies play 7 o'clock Wednesday. They're the 7th seed. They'll play the Clemson NC State winner, so 10-15 game. That's ESPN 2, ESPNU, I believe.
2.
So, should be a good game. Obviously, wrestling over the weekend. We didn't get a chance to mention it. 3 ACC champions, Corbin Myers, Mackay Lewis, and Nathan Traxler. And Jack Bresendine, shout out to him. Great coverage all weekend from the ACC Wrestling Championships in Charlottesville.
He was also down there.
He left Greensboro and covered that. Baseball obviously won this weekend. We touched on that. Chris Hirons had that. Baseball plays ECU tomorrow. No women's basketball this week, so it's kind of just no wrestling. Kind of just baseball, softball. Softball, we obviously talked about. Katie touched on what everybody else is coming up, and then basketball. So big weekend for Virginia Tech athletics after a pretty strong weekend. And Will, I forgot, Chris, what's the deal we have going on TSL right now? First month free, right?
I don't know.
Always first month free. Student subs are free. So great time to enjoy Tech Sideline.
All right, we had a long one today, but there was lots to go over. That's going to do it for episode 228 of the Tech Sideline podcast. We recapped the last 2 men's basketball games and what awaits them in the ACC tournament. Also dove into the women's team and their performance in the ACC tournament, talked some of the recent football coaches' interviews, and had an update on the 6th-ranked softball team. Want to thank everybody on set today. David Cunningham, managing editor of TechSideline.com. You can find him at The Real D Cunna on Twitter. Chris Coleman, lead analyst and columnist for Tech Sideline. He is at Chris Coleman TSL on Twitter. Nick Brown in the 4th chair and on set today is at Nick Brown 33 on Twitter. And Will Stewart, founder and general manager of TechSideline.com, who is behind the scenes today. You did it, Will. We got through the podcast. He's at Will Stewart TSL. I'm Katie Adams signing off on episode 228 of the Tech Sideline podcast. We'll see you next time.